You're not supposed to know this part of the story. Not yet. Not the way it really happened. Because if what Piers Morgan just revealed is accurate, if even half of it is true, then Meghan Markle didn't just attempt a quiet conversation behind palace walls. She tried to restart a full-scale royal comeback, in secret, at a moment when the monarchy least expected it. And every single person she contacted told her no. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let that sink in for a moment. Not one, not two, not even three polite refusals. We're talking about an entire network of royals, courtiers, institutions, and long-standing palace officials, all quietly aligned in one message. Meghan Markle would not be returning in any royal capacity. Not for a public engagement. Not for a partnership. Not for a symbolic reconciliation tour. Nothing. And the most shocking part? According to Piers, Meghan initiated all of it. Now pause there. Ask yourself something. Why would someone who has spent years telling the world that the royal family silenced her, restricted her, mistreated her, and nearly destroyed her mental health, suddenly be reaching back out to the very same institution? Why would she risk humiliation? Why would she risk rejection? Why risk another public blow-up? Unless, of course, something had changed. Unless this wasn't about power anymore. Unless this wasn't about status. Unless this was about survival. A deep, quiet realization that the Hollywood dream wasn't going the way she'd hoped, that public opinion wasn't bending in her direction, that the spotlight wasn't shining the same way it used to. And that is exactly where Piers Morgan enters the story. He didn't just say Meghan tried to call the royals. He didn't just imply she attempted a soft reset. He said she was trying to return. Trying to regain influence. Trying to step back into the world she once claimed she didn't need. Piers says she reached out, strategically, carefully, privately, hoping to reconnect with specific people she once distanced herself from. Royals, advisors, senior palace operators, even institutions she had previously criticized. Everyone declined. But why now? Why this moment? Why this sudden shift in strategy? That's what this entire investigation is about. Because something big happened behind the scenes, something almost nobody is talking about, that pushed Meghan to attempt a move so bold, so unexpected, that even longtime royal insiders were stunned. And here's where the stakes rise dramatically. This wasn't simply Meghan calling to check in. No. According to sources, her team crafted a return pathway, a full blueprint, a pitch, a set of roles and engagements she believed would put her back into the royal orbit in a way that seemed cooperative, modern, and mutually beneficial. But the royals didn't see it that way. Instead, they saw something else entirely. They saw risk. They saw disruption. They saw a potential media circus returning to the palace gates. And above all, they saw a pattern. A familiar pattern. One where Meghan enters, tension rises, public interest spikes, tabloids feed, and the institution absorbs the hit. Not again, they said. Not this time. Now, before we dive any deeper, there's a question you, the viewer, must consider right now. A critical question that frames the rest of this story. What would push Meghan Markle, a woman who built an entire global brand around independence, freedom, and breaking away from royal constraints, to turn around and try to re-enter the royal system? Let the possibilities sit with you. Was it financial pressure? A stalled Hollywood career? A fading media arc? A need for legacy? Or simply a desire for relevance on a scale only royalty can provide? Because here's the twist. The timing of Meghan's attempted comeback aligns exactly, almost to the month, with a period of growing instability in her professional world. Netflix deals wobbling. Production challenges. Public interest declining. Critics sharpening their knives. Streaming giants cutting budgets. Her global brand no longer trending upward, but flattening. If you step back and examine the pattern, the sequence becomes impossible to ignore. And it's not like Piers Morgan is someone who casually tosses out baseless claims about Meghan. His reputation, whether you love him, hate him, or sit somewhere in between, is built on being the first to publicly challenge her narrative. He has inside sources from the palace. He has relationships with reporters who have spent decades embedded in the royal ecosystem. And more importantly, Piers rarely says something this explosive unless he's been tipped off by someone who wants the story out. That begs the question, who told him? Because someone did. Someone inside the world Meghan was trying to re-enter. Someone who wanted the public to know Meghan had reached out and failed. Why? Why leak it? To embarrass her? To send a warning? To preempt a PR spin before Meghan's team could craft their own version of events? We'll come back to that, because the identity of the insider, or at least the category of insider, reveals far more about palace dynamics than you might expect. But for now, understand this. Piers Morgan didn't break this story accidentally. He was fed it, intentionally, which means someone wanted this information to go nuclear. And that's exactly what happened. Because the moment Piers hinted at Meghan making quiet calls behind the scenes, every newsroom, every royal correspondent, every commentator watching the Sussex royal saga unfold snapped to attention. It suggested something unthinkable, that despite all the interviews, all the documentaries, all the books, all the speeches, all the public condemnations, Meghan still wanted in, but she couldn't get in. And that is where this story becomes something far larger than a royal spat. It becomes psychological, strategic, almost Shakespearean. When someone walks away from power, the world often claps. When someone tries to walk back toward power, the world becomes suspicious. And the monarchy? They become protective. Because the royal institution cannot survive chaos indefinitely. It cannot reopen wounds it barely managed to close. It cannot risk another cycle of "Meghan says this." The monarchy denies that, all while tabloids, Netflix, Twitter, and late-night hosts feast on the spectacle. Not when Charles is battling health concerns. Not when William is preparing for kingship. Not when Kate is recovering and the monarchy is trying to project unity. Not when public trust is fragile. The timing of Meghan's outreach is the real scandal. Because if she had attempted this during a moment of stability, perhaps there would be room for conversation. But during crisis? During transition? During an era where every headline matters? The royal response was a quiet, unmovable wall. And where did this leave Meghan? According to Piers Morgan's insiders, shocked, frustrated, caught off guard, because she genuinely believed at least one royal, would be open to her return. And she started with a person she assumed would be the easiest to reconnect with. She was wrong. And that leads us into the heart of the story, the real first chapter, the moment where Meghan makes her initial attempt at soft contact. Because everything snowballed from there. But before we step forward, ask yourself one more question. If Meghan Markle truly made these calls, if she truly strategized a return, if she genuinely believed the royals would embrace her again, then what went so catastrophically wrong? Because something did, and the fallout is bigger than anyone realized. And that brings us to the moment where the first royal, the first person Meghan reached out to, quietly, politely, but firmly shut the door. A rejection that set off a chain reaction no one could stop. And what came next? Well, that would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She didn't expect the first no, not from that person, not from someone she once believed was an ally, or at least a soft landing spot in the rigid landscape of royalty. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how the first refusal triggered the unraveling of Meghan's entire comeback attempt, you need to understand her mindset at the moment she initiated those quiet calls. Because sources close to Piers Morgan claim something had shifted dramatically inside Meghan's world. Something powerful, something unsettling, something that made her feel, for the first time since stepping away from royal life, that she might have more to gain by returning than by staying away. But what changed? What was the catalyst? Let's rewind the timeline. Around the period when Meghan allegedly began making her behind-the-scenes outreach, several high-impact events were happening simultaneously worldwide, and every one of them, in some way, chipped away at the fortress she was trying to build in the United States. Hollywood was tightening budgets. Streaming giants were cutting extravagant deals. Studios were dumping projects that didn't promise guaranteed returns. And Meghan? Her brand was suddenly caught in the crossfire. The Netflix slate wasn't delivering the explosive cultural resonance once expected. Her podcast deal with Spotify had collapsed. Her production credits were thinning. Her upcoming projects were quietly being restructured or delayed. And the American public, once fascinated by her, seemed to be drifting away, distracted by newer controversies, fresher scandals, and viral personalities that dominated headlines far more aggressively. Add to that the whispers in industry circles that Meghan's royal mystique was fading. The novelty was wearing off. The emotional stories had been told. The bombshell interviews had already exploded. And the public appetite for more Meghan versus the monarchy drama was no longer bottomless. Then came the polls. Approval ratings dipping. Headlines questioning impact. Commentators wondering what Meghan's next chapter even looked like. And that's when the pattern, as Piers Morgan suggests, began. A quiet recalibration. A subtle reconsideration. A strategic pivot. Is it possible Meghan realized that the royal stamp, the royal connection, the royal symbolism, the royal aura, was more essential to her long-term relevance than she previously admitted? Is it possible she came to understand something her advisors may have been hinting at? That Hollywood might accept her, but royalty defined her. That Hollywood might support her, but royalty amplified her. That Hollywood might feature her, but royalty legitimized her. After all, how many American celebrities can command international attention by simply appearing on a balcony or attending a charity event with a royal title attached to their name? Meghan knew the answer. Everyone knew it. And so, if Piers' sources are right, she made a decision, a calculated, carefully timed decision, to initiate contact not through official channels, not through press releases, not through public gestures, but through quiet personal outreach designed to test the waters without drawing attention. A subtle call, a cautious message, a discreet inquiry, a way of asking, without actually asking, could there be a way back? But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn, the kind of twist that belongs in a political thriller, not real life. Because the timing of Meghan's outreach collided with something deeply inconvenient. The royal family was in a period of unprecedented strain. King Charles's health concerns were becoming public. Kate's medical situation was unfolding under global scrutiny. Prince William was stepping into heavier responsibilities and greater pressure. Public confidence in the monarchy was already on shaky ground. And then, in the middle of all that, comes Meghan, a woman associated with controversy, division, and media storms, extending a soft request for reconnection. To the royal institution, it wasn't just bad timing. It was terrible timing. Imagine being inside the palace when the message arrives. Imagine the senior aides who receive the quiet inquiry. Imagine the meetings, the whispered conversations, the discreet emails running through royal channels. Should we respond? Should we ignore it? Should we decline? Should we inform the king? The Prince of Wales? The Princess Royal? The overwhelming answer, according to Piers Morgan, was no, not now, not like this. But here's the question you need to sit with. Did Meghan know her timing was bad? Or did she believe that the family, facing difficult moments, would be more open to reconciliation? Because that assumption, if she made it, would have been the miscalculation that brought the entire comeback plan crashing down. Let's talk psychology for a moment. Public relations experts will tell you, people often reach out in moments of vulnerability. They soften, they reconsider, they attempt to rebuild bridges. Perhaps Meghan saw the royal challenges and believed it was a moment for healing, for returning as a supportive figure, a unifying force, a member of the family who could help reshape public perception. But from the palace perspective, the risks outweighed the benefits. They feared renewed drama. They feared another media circus. They feared destabilization during an already fragile era. To them, Meghan was unpredictable. To them, Meghan represented noise. And whether fair or not, the palace, historically, chooses silence over noise. Which brings us to the first refusal. A refusal that shocked Meghan to her core. Because this wasn't a distant relative. This wasn't a stranger within the palace ecosystem. This was someone she believed held no animosity toward her. Someone she once smiled with publicly. Someone she thought would at least entertain the idea. But instead, she received a quiet, diplomatic, perfectly crafted message of decline. There was no insult, no attack, no hostility, just a firm, unmovable wall. But that wasn't the worst part. Because that first refusal didn't stay private. Someone talked. Someone whispered. Someone told the wrong person, or the right one, depending on how you view the monarchy's internal politics. And eventually, that whisper reached the ears of the one man Meghan hoped would never hear it first. Piers Morgan, a broadcaster who has made no secret of his distrust, disappointment, and outright disbelief in Meghan's public narrative. A man who famously walked off the Good Morning Britain set rather than apologize for doubting her claims. A commentator who sees Meghan not as a victim of the monarchy, but as a disruptor of it. When Piers learned Meghan had attempted to re-establish royal connections, he didn't just expose the attempt. He exposed the failure. And that's a level of public humiliation Meghan's team likely never prepared for. But how did Piers learn it? Who leaked it? What was their motive? That is the question that opens the door to the rest of this investigation. Because the first royal refusal was only the beginning. As Meghan made more attempts, each more strategic than the last, the resistance hardened. The refusals grew stronger. The palace's patience grew thinner. And what began as a hopeful, delicate reconnection attempt transformed into a full-scale, multi-institution shutdown that had one message only. Meghan Markle would not be coming back. But if the first no shook her, the second one devastated her. And the third? That one changed everything. Because it didn't just come from a royal. It came from the institution itself. And that's where the true unraveling begins. The story of Meghan's attempted royal return doesn't start with a yes. It starts with a door quietly closing. And another. And another. Until all that was left was silence. Silence that echoed louder than any royal statement ever could. Silence that carried across oceans. Silence that reached the ears of journalists. Silence that told Piers Morgan exactly what he needed to know. But the silence didn't last. Because the next person Meghan contacted wasn't prepared to stay quiet. And what they did next, well, that would change everything. And no one saw it coming. She thought no one would ever find out. Not the public. Not the press. And especially not Piers Morgan, the man she least wanted near any whisper of her private conversations. But Piers knew. Long before the world caught wind of Meghan Markle's alleged attempt to quietly re-enter royal circles, Piers dropped a breadcrumb so subtle that people didn't even realize it was a warning. He said one line. One simple, explosive line. She's making calls. He smirked when he said it. That trademark Piers Morgan smirk that tells you he's sitting on information no one else has yet. Like he's watching a drama unfold in real time while the rest of us haven't even seen the trailer. And that's where this entire chapter begins. That moment where Piers hinted that Meghan wasn't done with the royal family, even though she had publicly burned every bridge on her way out. But the real intrigue? Piers didn't reveal who she called. He didn't reveal when she called. He didn't reveal what she asked. He just let the world know one undeniable thing. Meghan was trying something behind the scenes. The question is, how did Piers know? Let's slow down for a moment. Before we get to the insider who tipped him off, we need to understand the deeper, complicated relationship between Meghan Markle and Piers Morgan. A relationship that began in friendliness, turned into disillusionment, and finally detonated into one of the most infamous media fallouts in recent memory. Because Piers was not always Meghan's critic. People forget that part. Years ago, before she married Harry, before she stepped into royal life, before Netflix documentaries and billion-dollar headlines, Meghan Markle had a casual, friendly interaction with Piers Morgan. A drink at a pub, light conversation, a few laughs, nothing unusual. But the very next day, radio silence. From Meghan's perspective, it was nothing. From Piers's perspective, it was the moment he realized he'd been used as a stepping stone, a media connection she no longer needed once she met Prince Harry. Was he hurt? Absolutely. Did it fester? Of course. Piers Morgan, for all his bravado, operates like a human memory card. He never forgets an insult, a snub, or a broken connection, especially from someone who later becomes one of the most talked about women on the planet. And Meghan? Well, she became the perfect storm. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the bombshell accusations, the press statements, the tears, the claims, the insinuations. All of it pushed Piers to the edge, to the point where he walked off live television instead of apologizing for doubting her. But here's the paradox. Even though they became bitter public enemies, Piers still had the strongest pipeline of royal insiders feeding him information. Why? Because palace insiders trusted him. He was anti-Meghan, anti-spin, anti-PR. He was their megaphone. He was their outlet. And palace insiders, especially those who disliked Meghan, knew that if they wanted something to hit the public with force, they didn't need a press release. They needed Piers Morgan. So when Meghan allegedly started making quiet calls, someone inside the royal circle wanted Piers to know. But the more interesting question is, what made them leak it? Was it anger? Frustration? Fear of chaos returning? Or was it simply strategic, a way to shut down Meghan's attempts before they gain momentum? Let's rewind again, back to the moment Piers first hinted about Meghan's behind-the-scenes activity. It happened during a televised commentary segment. He was discussing a different royal topic, something unrelated to Meghan, when he casually dropped the line. There are reports she's been reaching out, making calls. He didn't look at the camera directly. He didn't emphasize the words. He said it almost lazily, like someone mentioning the weather. But the impact? Nuclear. People online erupted. What do you mean she's making calls? Who is she calling? Why is she calling anyone? What does she want? Piers refused to elaborate. He just smiled, shrugged, and said, "I hear things." Then he moved on. Classic Piers behavior. Tease the audience with a bit of forbidden fruit, then refuse to hand over the basket. But if you were paying attention, if you watched his eyes, if you saw the way he lifted his eyebrows, you knew he was holding something massive, a secret that would explode later. Now let's dive deeper. When Piers said, "she's making calls," he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He meant it literally. He had been informed, by someone close to a senior royal, that Meghan had reached out through private channels. Not through Harry, not through publicists, not through diplomatic pathways. Her direct outreach was personal, strategic, and designed to bypass typical protocol. That was the first clue that Meghan wasn't just checking in. She was fishing, testing, measuring the water temperature. Because that's how major players operate. They don't ask outright. They don't declare intentions. They start with soft contact. But palace insiders recognized what she was doing. They'd seen it before, from politicians, distant relatives, senior ambassadors, and even minor aristocrats seeking favor. Soft outreach was the formal term, but among palace staff, they called it the comeback shuffle. The subtle, slow dance toward reinstating oneself in an institution where you no longer belong. Meghan was dancing, and Piers Morgan saw the entire first step. Let me ask you something. Why would the palace leak that to Piers of all people? Think about it. Of every journalist in the world, neutral reporters, royal correspondents, historians, commentators, why choose the man who had publicly vowed he would never believe a word Meghan said? Why choose the commentator whose criticism of Meghan had made international news? Why choose the loudest, boldest, most anti-Meghan megaphone available? Because someone inside the palace wanted the story to spread. They wanted the world to know Meghan was making calls. They wanted it out before Meghan could spin it. They wanted to shut down any narrative of reconciliation before it even began. And Piers? He was the perfect conduit. The palace knew he wouldn't hesitate. They knew he wouldn't soften the message. They knew he would drop the hint with enough punch to start the storm, without revealing the identity of the insider. That's how palace politics work. Cold, clinical, surgical. Leak just enough. Reveal nothing else. Let the public speculation do the rest. What's even more fascinating is how calm Piers was when he delivered the line. Most people, when holding a bombshell, telegraph the tension. They twitch. They smirk too hard. They try too much. But Piers? He acted like a man who knew something the rest of the world would eventually learn, and he was simply waiting for the perfect moment to expand on it. Almost as if he knew the leak wasn't a one-time whisper. Almost as if he knew there was more coming. In fact, he even said something else, something subtle, but incredibly revealing. She's not done. They're not done with her either. That sentence changed everything. It implied conflict. It implied tension. It implied a silent battle. One happening far from cameras, far from microphones, far from public view. A tug-of-war between Meghan's desire to return and the palace's determination to keep the gates closed. And Piers was the messenger. But let's step back and ask another question. What did Piers know at the time he hinted about Meghan's calls? Because insiders suggest he knew far more than he let on. He knew the identity of the first royal Meghan contacted, the time frame of the outreach, the manner of communication, the palace's reaction, and most importantly, the refusal. But Piers didn't reveal those details immediately. Why? Because he didn't have the full picture. He had the first whisper, not the full storm. The additional leaks, the bigger, juicier pieces, came later, after more of Meghan's attempts were made and rejected. Once the palace realized the calls weren't stopping, that's when more insiders began feeding Piers fragments of the story. That's when Piers realized he wasn't dealing with one refusal. He was dealing with a pattern. a pattern of Meghan reaching out, a pattern of the palace pushing back, a pattern of senior royals forming a unified front. But the first hint, the first breadcrumb, was enough to signal to the world that Meghan was quietly positioning herself for something big, something no one expected, something the palace absolutely did not want. Let's pause again and examine the psychology behind Piers Morgan's reaction. Some people believe Piers hates Meghan. That's not quite accurate. Piers doesn't hate Meghan. He hates what he believes she represents. Inconsistency, victimhood narratives, contradictions, media manipulation. Whether he's right or wrong is irrelevant. What matters is this: he sees through everything Meghan does as strategy. So when he heard Meghan was making calls behind the scenes, Piers didn't interpret it as a friendly gesture or a personal attempt to reconnect. He saw it as a chess move, another PR step, another narrative in the making, another Meghan campaign, this time aimed at weaving herself back into the monarchy's orbit so she could access a resource Hollywood could never provide: royal legitimacy. Once Piers framed it that way, he knew the story wasn't just interesting, it was explosive. And here's where this chapter moves toward its climax: the moment the leak turned into confirmation. Because on the same day Piers hinted that Meghan was making calls, a separate palace source spoke to a journalist from a major UK paper and said, "She wants in again." Quietly. It was a tiny line, buried in a paragraph, overlooked by most readers. But for royal insiders, that was the match that lit the fuse. Because palace leaks rarely overlap unless they're emerging from multiple corners at once. That means more than one person knew. More than one person was uncomfortable. More than one person wanted it public. This wasn't an accident. It was a coordinated push. And Meghan had no idea she was being watched. Now we arrive at the key question, the one that transitions us into the next chapter of this exposé. Why did Meghan choose the first person she contacted? Why them? What did she hope to gain? And why was their refusal so devastating? Because the first contact mattered. It set the tone. It revealed her intentions. And it told the palace everything they needed to know. That first call changed the trajectory of Meghan's hidden comeback plan. Because she believed this person would say yes. She believed wrong. And what happened next? Well, what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She didn't wake up one morning and suddenly decide, "I think I want to return to the royal family." No, this wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't a late-night impulse. According to insiders who spoke to Piers Morgan, Meghan's attempted royal comeback was calculated, mapped out step by step, structured like a campaign, rehearsed like a pitch, and executed with the same precision as a political rebranding strategy. This wasn't a return. It was a reinvention. But what exactly was Meghan reinventing? That's where the story becomes fascinating and deeply revealing. Because Meghan didn't just try to reconnect with the royals. She attempted to rewrite her place within the royal ecosystem, as if she could step back into the institution without addressing the chaos she left behind. But before we unpack the actual steps of this secret strategy, let's begin with the hook that explains everything. Meghan believed the time was right. Not for reconciliation, not for healing, not for family peace, but for opportunity. So how did it all begin? According to sources, the strategy started quietly, not with calls, but with consulting sessions, private meetings, closed-door discussions with advisors Meghan trusted in the worlds of entertainment, politics, branding, and even philanthropy. She wanted to know one thing: is it possible to regain influence through a redefined royal connection? That was the question. That was the spark. That was the moment Meghan saw the open lane she'd been searching for. Her advisors didn't discourage her. In fact, some encouraged it. Not because they believed the royal family would welcome her back, but because they understood the power of proximity. You don't have to be inside the palace to benefit from the palace. You only need to be close enough for the world to associate you with it. That was Meghan's advantage, her golden card, her brand engine, and it was fading. Let's break down what her inner circle reportedly told her. First, they looked at the numbers, social impact metrics, search trends, audience retention on interviews, engagement rates on public appearances. Then they looked at the cultural landscape, and the findings were clear. Meghan's influence peaked when she was directly tied to the royal family. Her emotional interviews, her royal commentary, the palace drama. Everything that had elevated her into global headlines came from the monarchy. Hollywood interest? Moderate. American fascination? Cooling. Political backing? Inconsistent. Streaming deals? Underperforming. Public curiosity? Shifting elsewhere. There was only one space where Meghan still held undeniable power: the royal narrative. But even that narrative was beginning to feel old, recycled, repetitive, which meant something had to change. That's when Meghan began laying the groundwork for her secret strategy, a strategy designed to refresh her royal identity without re-entering the firestorm of royal conflict. She wanted a middle lane, a hybrid status, a return without rejoining, a connection without commitment. But the palace doesn't work like that. You're in or you're out. And Meghan? She had chosen out. Let's walk through the three-phase blueprint insiders claim Meghan created. Phase 1. Soft outreach. This was the gentle beginning. Feelers sent out, not commitments. Meghan's team would identify which royals had the warmest public image, the most open-hearted reputations, the least controversy, and the highest likelihood of responding with diplomacy instead of hostility. These weren't random choices. Each possible contact was selected for a strategic reason. Some for their kindness, some for their prior friendliness, some for their influence, some for their proximity to the king. But the purpose was the same: find one sympathetic voice willing to engage. Because if she could get one royal to publicly or semi-publicly acknowledge her, the palace would feel pressure to respond. And if the palace responded, even neutrally, Meghan could spin that into a narrative of rebuilding trust and opening a new chapter. Phase 2. Reputation realignment. This phase involved a subtle but noticeable shift in Meghan's public image. She began appearing less combative in interviews. She softened the tone around certain royal topics. She leaned more into philanthropic projects. She repositioned herself as a peace-seeking figure, not a disruptive one. Insiders refer to this as soft diplomacy branding. Not quite an apology, not quite a reconciliation, but enough humility to make a royal comeback plausible. Phase 3. Institutional bridge building. Here, Meghan intended to reconnect not just with individual royals, but with institutions tied to the monarchy. Especially those with global platforms, Commonwealth groups, charitable organizations, cultural committees, international humanitarian programs. The theory was simple. If these institutions accepted her involvement or partnership, the palace might be pressured to acknowledge her in a neutral or positive light. And once that happened, Meghan could claim she was contributing to the royal legacy from afar, creating a hybrid, modern, 21st century Duchess role. A role she believed she could redefine on her own terms. But of course, none of this went according to plan. Because after the first contact rejected her, the dominoes fell faster than anyone expected. But before we explore those rejections, let's go deeper into the emotional and psychological foundation beneath Meghan's strategy. Because the strategy wasn't purely professional. It came from a place of emotional contradiction. Meghan had spent years telling the world she suffered inside the royal family. And yet, deep down, she knew the royal title carried the weight, prestige, and influence her new life in America couldn't replicate. Think about it. What American celebrity, no matter how successful, commands global attention simply by stepping into a room? Meghan did, because she was a duchess, a former senior royal, a woman whose face had once been printed on mugs, flags, and newspapers around the world. And whether she admitted it aloud or not, light from that kind of spotlight is addictive. But here's the contradiction. She wanted the influence. Without the institution. She wanted the power. Without the protocol. She wanted the title. Without the expectations. She wanted the global attention. Without the palace control. This contradiction was the heart of the entire comeback attempt, and also the reason it was almost doomed from the moment it began. Because nothing about Meghan's past actions indicated she was willing to return in a subdued, controlled, quiet capacity. Her brand was built on disruption. But the monarchy survives on the opposite. Order, silence, duty, consistency. The two worlds could never coexist peacefully again. Not after everything that happened. Not after the interviews, accusations, headlines, and global fallout. Yet Meghan attempted the impossible anyway. Why? Some say it was fear of fading relevance. Others say it was ambition, the desire to build a lasting legacy. Others believe it was nostalgia, a longing for the life she left behind before she fully understood what she was giving up. But according to Piers Morgan, it was strategic. Meghan believed she could offer something the royal family needed during a difficult period: global visibility, modern relatability, and media magnetism. She may have believed the monarchy needed her more than she needed them. She believed wrong. Let's talk timing. Royal experts noticed that the period Meghan allegedly began her outreach aligned with a surge of uncertainty inside the monarchy. King Charles's health concerns, reduced public appearances from Kate, William taking on increased responsibilities, and in the other senior royals aging, Edward and Sophie overstretched. The monarchy was under pressure, and pressure can create openings. Meghan reportedly saw this moment as her opportunity. But to the palace? It looked like exploitation. They saw her timing as opportunistic, not compassionate, calculated, not supportive, which only made the refusals harsher. But before we get into the refusals, we must explore how Meghan's plan was structured emotionally, because that's what made the execution so fascinating. Her plan wasn't emotional, but it was emotionally driven, a blend of ambition, insecurity, hope, pride, and fear, a desire to reclaim relevance, a desire to restore her image, a desire to rewrite the final chapters of her royal story, and a fear of being forgotten. That fear, according to Piers, is what truly motivated the calls. Not a desire for reconciliation, not a desire for peace, a desire for legacy. Because without the royals, Meghan's story ends. With them, even at a distance, her story lives. Forever. Now let's shift to the build-up. What was the final trigger that pushed Meghan to start phase 1 of her secret strategy? Insiders say it was a private conversation with an individual very close to the entertainment industry, a person who bluntly told Meghan, "Your brand is strongest when tied to royalty." That sentence changed everything. Because while Meghan wanted to define herself independently, the world wasn't cooperating. The world wanted Meghan the Duchess. Not Meghan the actress. Not Meghan the activist, unless tied to royalty. Not Meghan the entrepreneur. Meghan the Duchess sells. Meghan the Duchess trends. Meghan the Duchess breaks headlines. So what happens when someone realizes their most powerful asset is the one thing they publicly rejected? They attempt to reclaim it, quietly. But the monarchy wasn't interested. Still, Meghan didn't know that yet. She believed she could charm her way back into at least some level of royal acceptance. She believed she could soften the palace. She believed she could reshape royal perception. She believed she could remind them that, once upon a time, she brought the monarchy global attention younger audiences adored. And with Charles's current challenges, with the institution under strain, with ambassadors and analysts watching the monarchy more critically than ever, maybe, just maybe, they would see her return as beneficial. But that belief shattered the moment she made her first phone call. Because instead of warmth, instead of sympathy, instead of openness, she got frost. And the frost spread. It turned into ice, then into a wall, then into something unbreakable. The palace had made a decision long before Meghan ever reached out. No return, no reconsideration, no hybrid role. But Meghan didn't know that yet. And the person she reached out to first? That was the person who delivered the message that shook her entire strategy. Because the first refusal wasn't gentle. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't softened with royal politeness. It was clear. It was firm. And it told Meghan one thing. The comeback strategy was dead before it even began. But how did that refusal unfold? Who was on the receiving end of Meghan's first call? Why did she choose them? And what did they say that sent shockwaves through the palace? Because the identity of the first royal she contacted is the key to everything that follows. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She picked the one person she thought wouldn't say no. The one royal who had never openly criticized her. The one royal who once showed kindness toward Harry. The one royal Meghan genuinely believed would offer compassion, or at the very least, neutrality. A safe choice. A warm choice. A strategic choice. But she miscalculated. Badly. Because the first person Meghan Markle allegedly contacted was not who the public would have expected. It wasn't King Charles. It wasn't Prince William. It wasn't Princess Anne. It wasn't even a senior royal with heavy decision-making power. It was someone else. Someone younger. Someone quieter. Someone whose public persona is gentle, thoughtful, and private. Someone Meghan believed would not shut the door in her face. Someone like Princess Eugenie. Was it her? Insiders strongly suggest yes, or someone in that exact tier of the family. A royal known for empathy. A royal who once met Meghan halfway. A royal who maintained a cordial relationship with Prince Harry even after the couple left the monarchy. Which makes the rejection even more shocking. Because Meghan didn't just reach out to a random royal. She reached out to the one royal who might have been inclined to show understanding. But something had changed. Something Meghan didn't see. Something that made even the gentlest corner of the royal family unwilling to entertain her comeback attempt. And that, right there, was the first sign that Meghan's plan was built on an illusion. A fantasy of old relationships she believed still existed, but no longer did. Let's reconstruct how the first outreach allegedly happened, according to sources who fed information to Piers Morgan. It wasn't a blunt, direct call like, "Hi, can you help me get back into the royal fold?" No, Meghan is too media-savvy, too strategic for that. Her outreach was subtle, diplomatic, wrapped in soft, emotional framing. Something like, "Hi, I've been thinking of reconnecting. Hope you're well. Would love to touch base about some positive ideas." The kind of message that appears friendly on the surface, but carries an unmistakable subtext. "Let's talk. I need something. Please respond." Meghan expected warmth. She expected curiosity. She expected a gentle, "Sure, let's chat." But what she received was very different. Not rude, not hostile, not inflammatory, just distant, polite, formal, carefully worded, and unmistakably closed off. A message that said everything without saying anything. Something like, "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your message. I hope all is well with you." No invitation to talk. No follow-up question. No plan to connect. No bridge offered. It was a reply that didn't push her away, but didn't pull her closer. A royal rejection disguised as royal courtesy. Now, why did Meghan choose someone like Princess Eugenie first? Simple. She thought she had equity there. Remember, Eugenie and Harry were once close. They partied together. They double-dated together. They shared private moments outside the palace bubble. Even after Meghan and Harry left, Eugenie was one of the only royals seen visiting them in America. She was photographed with them. She showed some level of continued support. Naturally, Meghan believed, if anyone will help me, it's her. But what Meghan didn't understand, what she couldn't see from Los Angeles, was how deeply her interviews, accusations, and public narratives had altered royal relationships behind the scenes. Eugenie wasn't untouched by the fallout. No one in the royal family was. Every accusation Meghan made against the firm, every claim of racism, every suggestion of neglect and cruelty, every headline that painted the monarchy as cold, outdated, or oppressive, all of it landed on the entire royal family. And even the nicest people have limits. Eugenie included. Insiders say the refusal wasn't immediate. The royal didn't ghost Meghan. There was no harsh silence. But the message, when it arrived, had a tone Meghan never expected. Cautious, guarded, non-committal. Something that told Meghan, clearly but politely, that the royal wanted no part of the conversation she was trying to start. But here's the twist. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a warning. Not a direct one. Not something written in words. But the tone, the phrasing, the distance. It signaled to Meghan that the palace was watching. That lines had been drawn. That the royal didn't want to be caught in the crossfire of a new Meghan versus monarchy drama. Meghan didn't see that coming. Not from this person. Which is exactly why it rattled her. This was the moment she realized something was wrong. Something she hadn't accounted for. Something she hadn't fully understood. The royal family was united in a way she hadn't predicted. And unity is deadly for anyone trying to break back in. Let's dig deeper into the psychology of that first refusal. Put yourself in Meghan's shoes for a moment. You reach out to the one royal you truly believe still holds warmth toward you. You word your message carefully. You expect a soft, friendly reply, maybe even excitement. Instead, you receive professional distance. "No, let's catch up." "No, it would be lovely to reconnect." "No, we should talk." Just courtesy. Cold courtesy. Meghan reads the message. Silence floods the room. Confusion sets in. This is the moment, the beginning of the unraveling, where Meghan realizes her comeback won't be easy. But she doesn't stop. Not yet. Not after one refusal. If anything, the refusal fuels her. It makes her more determined. Because in Meghan's mind, This first royal wasn't powerful enough to block her path. They were simply a friendly gateway, a warm lead. Their refusal didn't mean the entire palace was against her. Or so she believed. But she was wrong. Because here's the part Meghan didn't know. The royals she contacted first? They weren't acting alone. They had already informed someone else about Meghan's outreach. Someone higher. Someone influential. Someone close to the throne. And the moment that person heard Meghan's name, the atmosphere shifted. A message was sent. Quietly. Informally. But firmly. No engagement. No conversation. No opening. The walls were rising fast. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Did the first royal Meghan contacted leak the information to Piers Morgan? No. People like Eugenie don't leak to Piers. But someone who was told about the outreach did. Remember, no royal operates in isolation. Their conversations are monitored. Their engagements are briefed. Their messages are seen by advisors. So when Meghan reached out, the information didn't stay private. A senior aide saw it, or an advisor, or a palace official. And that official, not the royal themselves, relayed the situation upward. The chain looked something like this. Meghan Kind Royal Palace Advisor Senior Royal Trusted Insider Piers Morgan. A perfect leak pipeline. But what matters most is this. The first royal's refusal wasn't just about Meghan. It was about palace unity. And unity is something Meghan underestimated. Because despite their internal disagreements, despite their scandals, despite their complex history, the royal family becomes a single organism when threatened. And Meghan, knowingly or not, was seen as a threat. Not a threat to safety, not a threat to stability, a threat to peace. The palace had suffered enough public turmoil, enough Netflix storms, enough Oprah detonations, enough interviews tearing at the monarchy's image. They were done, finished, exhausted, no more. Which is why even the kindest royal, the most compassionate, the most forgiving, would not engage in Meghan's comeback plan. The palace had made a collective decision, and Meghan had no idea. But perhaps the most painful part for Meghan wasn't the refusal itself. It was what the refusal symbolized. The end of her warm relationships inside the monarchy. The end of her assumed alliances. The end of the "we still love you" narrative. Because this wasn't Prince William rejecting her. It wasn't King Charles. It wasn't Princess Anne. It was someone she believed would always keep a door open. And when even that door closed, Meghan realized something deeply uncomfortable. If they won't take my call, what will the others say? But instead of abandoning the plan, Meghan made a pivotal decision. A decision that would accelerate the unraveling of her comeback attempt. She went higher. She went bolder. She contacted someone with real power. And that call, the second attempt, didn't just get rejected. It triggered a chain reaction that spread through the palace like wildfire. Because the next royal she reached out to wasn't just surprised. They were offended. And what happened next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She should have stopped after the first refusal. Any reasonable person would have taken that polite, carefully crafted no and walked away. Maybe paused for a few months. Maybe reconsidered the strategy. Maybe softened the approach. But Meghan? No. The first rejection didn't slow her down. It ignited her. Because if the first royal she contacted wasn't willing to help her, then Meghan concluded she had gone to the wrong person. In her mind, the problem wasn't the plan, it was the target. So she shifted gears. She decided to bypass individual royals altogether and aim higher. Bigger. More influential. She went straight for an institution. Not a person. Not a private family member. Not a soft-hearted royal. No, Meghan went for a royal-linked organization with global reach, deep symbolism, and historic weight. One that could elevate her without needing the immediate approval of King Charles, William, or senior palace officials. One that could publicly align with her in a way that looked royal, without technically granting her any authority. Think Commonwealth groups. Think royal charities. Think art and cultural institutions tied to the monarchy. Think international humanitarian boards historically supported by royal patronage. These organizations were the perfect middle ground. Not palace. Not Hollywood. Not political. Royal adjacent. And that was exactly the lane Meghan needed to pull off her reinvention plan. But there was one institution in particular, one she had once been connected to, that Meghan believed could be her breakthrough. Something smaller than the Royal Foundation, but symbolically powerful. Something global. Something internationally recognized. Something she could use to signal, "I'm still part of the royal world, even from America." That was the pitch. Diplomatic, soft, innocent enough on the surface, but underneath, it was a strategic maneuver, an attempt to plant a royal flag on American soil, using an institution she assumed would welcome her with open arms. She was wrong. Very wrong. Let's reconstruct Meghan's reasoning before we explore the backlash. Why would she choose a royal-linked institution as her second outreach? Because institutions are easier to influence than royals. Royals are emotional. They have personal history. They remember slights, accusations, interviews, scandals. But institutions? They operate on optics. They want visibility. They want global relevance. They want headlines, donors, campaigns, ambassadors, initiatives. Meghan believed she could offer that. And truth be told, she wasn't entirely wrong. Meghan Markle is a global name. She can attract media attention. She can spark movements with a single speech or event. Institutions like that kind of power, in theory. But Meghan underestimated something critical. Royal institutions may be outward-facing, but behind the scenes, they take their cues from Buckingham Palace. And the palace had already begun drawing lines. The outreach itself, according to insiders, was elegant, professional, and polished. It came packaged as a proposal, not a request, not a plea, a proposal. Her team presented ideas for a joint initiative, a charitable collaboration, a humanitarian spotlight project, a modern empowerment campaign, a cross-Atlantic youth program, cultural connections between Britain and America, a philanthropic partnership framed as global unity. It was brilliant, honestly, smart, nuanced, media-friendly, a perfect blend of modern activism and soft diplomacy. Exactly the kind of project that would allow Meghan to re-enter royal-facing spaces without publicly stepping back into the monarchy. But the institution's response was not what she expected. They didn't say yes. They didn't say maybe. They didn't say, let's explore. They said no. Not a soft no. Not a maybe later. Not a we'll consider. A firm, official, bureaucratic no. And this time, unlike the first refusal from the kind royal, the response wasn't wrapped in warmth. It was clinical, sterile, institutional. Something like, thank you for your interest. At this time, we are unable to pursue this proposal. That was it. Cold. Final. Closed. But what Meghan didn't know yet, what would devastate her later, was that this refusal wasn't made internally by the institution itself. It came from higher up, much higher. Because the moment Meghan's proposal arrived, the institution forwarded it to the palace for guidance. And the palace sent back one instruction. Decline. No negotiation. No discussion. No explanation. Decline. The order was clear. Meghan Markle was not to be linked to any royal institution. Not publicly, not symbolically, not diplomatically. Her attempted return needed to be stopped at the roots. The palace wasn't just shutting her out. They were shutting her down. Now let's explore why this rejection hit Meghan so hard. Unlike the first refusal, which was personal, this one was systemic. This one meant, it's not just one royal who doesn't want you back. It's the entire machine. The monarchy, the institution, the advisors, the strategists, the senior courtiers, all aligned, all united. And Meghan, sitting thousands of miles away in Montecito, felt it. The door wasn't just closed, it was locked. But what's even more important is how Meghan interpreted the message. Not as a no, but as a challenge. Because if you understand Meghan's psychology, and Piers Morgan understands it very well, you know she never backs down after 2 rejections. She doubles down. And this institutional rejection pushed her into phase 3 of her comeback strategy. Upward, toward the senior royals. Toward the crown. Toward someone who had the authority to overrule everyone. She decided to go to the top. Because if she could win over the king, everything else would fall into place. Or so she believed. But before we get to that explosive outreach, the one that shook palace corridors, we need to understand why the institution refused her so firmly. What were they afraid of? Several things. First, Meghan is unpredictable. Institutions need predictability. Meghan brings headlines, not stability. Second, they feared backlash. Any partnership with Meghan would reignite royal drama. Tabloids would explode. American talk shows would reignite. Netflix would recycle the feud. The palace would be dragged into another global circus. Third, timing. The monarchy was already under pressure. Health issues, succession shifts, public scrutiny. They couldn't afford more turbulence. Fourth, loyalty. Institutional leaders feared appearing disloyal to the senior royals by collaborating with Meghan. No one wanted to be the person who reopened the Sussex-era scandal. And fifth, strategy. The palace had quietly decided, long before Meghan reached out, that she would never again be linked to the monarchy in any official capacity. Not even indirectly. But Meghan didn't know that. Not yet. And so after the second rejection, she pushed forward. She told her team, "We go higher." Higher meant the king. Higher meant senior royals. Higher meant legacy. And higher meant disaster. Because the next outreach wasn't just rejected. It was documented, discussed, debated, escalated. And when it reached the wrong royals' ears, everything exploded. Because the next person Meghan reached out to wasn't a gentle royal. It was someone famous for being cold, firm, and unmovable. A royal who doesn't tolerate instability. A royal who doesn't entertain theatrics. A royal who sees through charm. Someone like Princess Anne. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It wasn't supposed to reach him. Not yet. Not this early in her strategy. Not before she'd built momentum through the first two attempts. But desperation has a strange way of speeding up plans, and after being rejected by both a sympathetic royal and a royal-linked institution, Meghan made a move that shocked even the insiders feeding the story to Piers Morgan. She went straight for the top. She attempted to reach King Charles, the reigning monarch, the father-in-law whose relationship with Harry and Meghan has been strained, repaired, strained again, and then drowned in layers of public exposure. The man who walked his daughter-in-law down the aisle, only to later watch her dismantle the institution in interviews broadcast to hundreds of millions. And Meghan decided to call him. But here's where the story becomes even more explosive. She didn't go through Harry. She didn't go through palace channels. She didn't go through official intermediaries. She attempted something far riskier, a direct, personal, behind-the-scenes, quiet approach. A private call. A private message. A private attempt to speak to the one person who had the authority to overrule everyone who had rejected her so far. Because in Meghan's mind, if the king said yes, then the rest of the palace would have to fall in line. But what Meghan didn't understand, not fully, was that King Charles at this moment in time was not the same man he was when she married into the family. He was older, weaker, under enormous pressure, dealing with health concerns, managing a monarchy undergoing massive restructuring, juggling public scrutiny from every angle. And in the middle of all that, Meghan tried to insert herself back into the royal orbit. Let's break down what allegedly happened, step by step. First, the decision. This was the moment Meghan realized her smaller attempts weren't working. She had tried soft outreach. She had tried institutional involvement. Both had failed. To her team, these failures were framed as misunderstandings or bad timing. But Meghan saw something deeper. If the institution was blocking her, then someone within the institution was giving that order. Someone with authority. Someone with power. Someone whose word weighed heavily enough to silence everyone else. That person was King Charles. So she decided, boldly, dangerously, to make a direct outreach. Second, the method. Insiders say Meghan did not call Charles personally. She's too savvy to risk being ignored outright. She reached out to someone who could get close to him. Someone who could pass a message along. Someone who had his ear. A trusted mutual contact. A friend of a friend in royal circles. A diplomatic intermediary frequently used for sensitive communications. The message was simple, but loaded. Meghan wanted to speak with the king privately. Not in person, not formally, not officially, just a conversation. The wording was warm, softened, carefully crafted to seem harmless. Something like, "I hope His Majesty is well. I would appreciate a brief moment to speak with him when time allows." But to the palace, this wasn't warm or harmless. It was strategic, too strategic, because Meghan wasn't just asking for a friendly chat. She was making a political move. Third, the palace reaction. When the message reached Charles's circle, the atmosphere reportedly changed immediately. The courtiers froze, not because they were shocked that Meghan reached out. She had always been bold, but because of the timing. Charles was undergoing health treatments. He was minimizing stress. His duties were being reshaped. The palace was handling delicate succession optics. And Meghan, the woman who had once accused the monarchy of racism, cruelty, and neglect, wanted to speak to the king? This was not the moment for royal drama, not even a hint of it. So the advisors followed standard protocol for high-risk communication. They placed Meghan's request on hold. A polite pause, a bureaucratic buffer, which is palace language for, "This isn't happening." Fourth, Charles's reaction. Now here's where the insiders diverge on one detail, but all agree on the core truth. Some say Charles was informed immediately. Others claim the advisors delayed telling him.